G'day, May 40 here. I really didn't want to do this stream because I've just been living in a place of light and love. Right? I've just been communing with Hashem. Right? I've just been one with the master of the universe. I have left the world of Gashmias, the world of the physical, and I've just been living in a elevated world of Ruknias, the world of the spirit, for the past week. And it's just such a bummer having to come down to earth, but I know that you're hurting right now. I know that you're suffering, that you're aghast, you're appalled that we are halfway to a police state, guys. We are halfway to fascism and Maoism. In fact, I've been reading on the internet that Donald Trump is apparently using fascism and Maoism. He is stripping our most sacred rights, including like Harvard University. Their tax-exempt status, guys, is at risk. And our whole country was built so that Harvard and all the major institutions of the left would have tax-exempt status. And I mean, our civil liberties to be illegal aliens in the United States as members of gangs, right? These most sacred rights, I mean, this is who we are. We are all El Salvadoran gangbangers who beat our wives and engage in sex trafficking. I mean, that is who we are as Americans. And I can't believe that this country has become a place where El Salvadoran illegal aliens who participate, who are members of criminal gangs and, you know, beat their wives and do the old sex trafficking, that we're now sending them back to their country of origin. My God, we are halfway to Auschwitz right now. And frankly, I just wanted to stay in a world of love and light and just commune with Hashem. I didn't want to come down to, you know, this depressing police state, but I thought, 40, you need to do something nice for the Goyim. Before you return to Passover, you need to express some empathy for how much they are suffering under this fascist, Maoist Trump police state. We're halfway to Auschwitz. Like the end of time is near. It's just so bad out there. Like all our fundamental rights to be illegal alien gangbangers engaged in sex trafficking and beating the hell out of our wives, these are being robbed from us. And at such times, let's hear what concerned citizen John Podhoretz has to say.
Looking seriously at revoking Harvard's tax exemption as a nonprofit. This is a way more serious thing than people realize, and is actually, had they gone there first as opposed to second? No, I know something about this because Commentary is a nonprofit institution, and in 2010 or 2011, like other conservative institutions, we got a letter revoking Harvard's from the IRS claiming that we had violated our tax exemption and that we needed to prove that we had not done so or it would be removed. So I called a lawyer looking into what to do about this. The reason that we were so accused is that Joe Lieberman had come to give a speech at Commentary in 2008. And in the course of this speech, the text of which we published on our website, he endorsed John McCain for president. Commentary is a 501c3 nonprofit, cannot endorse candidates. Commentary did not endorse John McCain. And but we published this thing where the text of this speech given at a Commentary event by the late Joe Lieberman. And called the lawyer and said, well, obviously this is a First Amendment, like they can't take away our tax exempt status because of published one thing. And our lawyer said, no, actually they can. They have almost unlimited discretion to revoke tax exempt status. The head of the IRS has unlimited discretion. There in no way, shape, or form do you have a right to a tax exemption. A tax exemption is granted you as long as you fulfill certain mandates. One of those mandates is that you don't endorse candidates. So not only don't you have a right to a tax exemption, but they can pull your tax exemption and you have no recourse. There is no finding of law that says that you are granted a tax exemption. It is a gift of the federal government in a funny way. And regulations have been written. If they show you violated the regulations, they can. And Harvard has violated Title VI without question. It has violated. It even kind of acknowledges that it violated Title VI in the letter that Alan Garber wrote about how wonderful they've been to change their policies to protect Jewish students. Harvard's in real trouble if this goes forward, because this is how the law works. And Harvard is in breach of its. Now we got out of this, by the way, since I told the story. My method of getting out of it was to put into literally print 1 million pages of documents That was the entirety of our website in the year 2008. So or published more than 1 million words.
Oh, whoa! This blows my mind. So apparently, the president of the United States, the IRS, has enormous discretion about who gets tax exempt status. You mean that tax exempt status is not some sacred right? You mean that there's really no judicial remedy if the IRS decides to revoke your tax exempt status? Are you reminding me of when the Obama administration made sure that no Tea Party nonprofits could get tax exempt status, that presidents of the United States routinely use the IRS and their full powers of the executive branch to bully their opponents? Oh my God. So perhaps what Donald Trump is doing is really not such a big stretch from what we've known previously. George Friedman on how geopolitics drives
means
Trump's
for them
tariffs.
and what the new system might look like with regards to them. So the old system is obsolete. What I kind of want to understand, and I think a lot of people outside the US wonder, is, there's this idea that's being
fairness. It's about interest.
Perhaps the US is over committing resources in a way it doesn't need to. Is the global system currently unfair?
International politics is about not fairness. It's about interest. Is this system in the interest of the United States? The United States and no other country.
Whoa, George Friedman, you're blowing my mind. Did he just say that the whole purpose of the United States is not to be fair to foreigners? I thought that was who we are as Americans. I thought the most sacred value is for us to be fair to foreigners and just, frankly, just bend over and take it up the ass from foreigners, right? The WTO has done nothing but rape the United States of America. There has never been a single time when the World Trade Organization has made a ruling in favor of American workers. The WTO exists only to rape the United States of America, right? As far as an American is concerned, that is the only purpose of the World Trade Organization. And now you're telling me that it's not the purpose of the United States to bend over and get raped by every other nation, in particular China? You mean it's not the whole purpose of the United States to be nice and fair and liberal and kind and progressive to other nations? You mean that there might be a higher purpose to our existence as members of the United States of America than taking it up the ass from foreigners? My God, you are blowing my mind. I thought respect for the Supreme Court, respect for due process, respect for all the rights of illegal alien gangbangers who beat their wives and participate in sex trafficking. I thought as Americans, our whole purpose was to service other nations in the world and to allow their illegal aliens to come over and rape us and to allow their manufacture and trade systems to rape us. And now George Friedman's blowing my mind. He says that there's a different purpose for the United States of America aside from being raped by foreigners. My God.
Exists to be fair to other countries. They're there to pursue their interests, sort of like Adam Smith and Invisible.
Whoa. So the purpose of the United States is to pursue its interests? That sounds really un-American. I thought the purpose of the United States was to serve foreigners.
So what the question is this in the interest of the United States? And it leaves the United States in a very vulnerable position. And from my point of view, the vulnerability is not financial. So we import vast amounts of equipment from China. What if China cut that off? Or what if there was unrest in China and the Chinese had some sort of political problem? What if China had a financial breakdown?
Wait. I've discovered so many experts on free trade the last 3 weeks. Right? I didn't know that there were millions of Americans who are making vast sweeping proclamations in the public square, including on X and on Mark Halperin's show, with about all their expertise in free trade. And they were all saying that free trade is just wonderful, that we just have to give it up to foreigners, allow them to rape us every which way. And it's the purpose of the United States to act as the world's market and screw American citizens. We're here to service the Chinese. And now George Friedman's saying something different. Like, I've just been listening to all these free trade experts, and I thought they were telling me it's absolutely the will of heaven. It is all that is true and good and holy, that the United States must remain super vulnerable to any dislocation, right? To be a free trader means that we have to completely rely on supply chains coming from our enemies, coming from our rivals, on goods traveling across the world, that if we were to take any steps, right, to protect America, to protect America's security interests, to protect America's, God forbid, communal interests, social interests, cultural influence, manufacturing interests, if we take any steps to create a certain kind of United States of America that is willing to try to provide a decent living for people on the bottom half of the IQ scale, that is the greatest travesty. That's what I heard, that we absolutely have to make ourselves as vulnerable as possible to our rivals, because that's free trade, man. We have to allow China and our rivals to just F us over every which way, because that's free trade. And if we start looking out for our own interests and developing any kind of manufacturing base to protect America, to protect America's security, but oh my God, to operate the United States of America and its trade policies in the interests of Americans, including even those half of Americans who are below average in IQ. My God, what an abomination if we did that. Wow, what if we created the kind of economy where people who had average IQs could earn a decent to good salary in manufacturing jobs, right? There aren't service industry jobs that pay a good salary for people with an average IQ, but there are manufacturing jobs that pay a good salary with good benefits for people with an average IQ. What if we created a United States of America that takes care of Americans, including even those with average IQs, including even those with below average IQs? Oh my God, what if we looked out for them? What if we looked out for American interests? And oh no, we can't do that because that's trying to be autarkic. That's trying to be entirely self-sufficient. So perhaps just like reducing our vulnerability a little bit, protecting some manufacturing base so that if we need to start manufacturing weapons, we can do that rapidly. How did the United States manufacture so many ships, planes, and weapons in World War II? Because we already had a pre-existing manufacturing base, and we just transitioned, for example, our enormous car industry over to making weapons. But because we don't have that enormous manufacturing base, we can't do that anymore. And we found out during COVID how absolutely vulnerable we are. And I think a lot of wiser people, including economists, realize that the whole, untrammeled free trade thing isn't exactly what it's cracked up to be.
Down. We've created a dependency in the United States on foreign resources.
I thought that's who we are as Americans, right? I've heard from millions of experts on free trade now that to be an American is to be as dependent on foreigners as possible. Particularly, it's very, very important if you're a true fair dinkum American that you support America being as vulnerable to our greatest geostrategic rival, China, as possible. Now, we hate Russia, and we should never do anything to make ourselves vulnerable to Russia because Russia's not down with the whole LGBTQ plus agenda. It's not down with the globo homo. But aside from that, absolutely essential that we render ourselves as vulnerable to ass rape from China and our other competitors as possible.
Build our own industrial plants and our own economy. So this leaves us very vulnerable to the world. The vulnerability was necessary during the Cold War, but I think the intent is to reduce the involvement of the United States.
Really? Was it really necessary that we be this vulnerable during the Cold War? I'm failing to see what's in it for America. In particular, I'm failing to see what's in it for your average IQ American, even, God forbid, your below average IQ American, right? Should we consider them for a minute?
Dependency on the world. So when the world says it depends on the United States for stability, the United States depends on the world for stability, in the sense that we can't guarantee what our political relationships, our military relationships will be with China. And so therefore, our financial relationship must take into account the possibility that we cannot be that dependent on these countries.
And look, obviously, we saw a fair bit of that during the COVID pandemic, and there was a sort of global awakening in many ways, or at least for many people, there was that supply chains were very vulnerable. I mean, why do you think Trump and his administration is taking such a perhaps more radical way of dealing with this than the Biden administration did? Because obviously, then, to an extent, there was a certain amount of decoupling, or whatever you want to call it, going on already.
Well, the decoupling did not have to do with political parties. That was going on. The issue was it going on quickly enough? The longer the United States remained dependent on the inflow of goods from foreign countries, at prices
Whoops. That's the wrong one.
we couldn't compete with. The longer, the more dangerous disruption would be. The global system is continually undergoing disruption in unpredictable ways. We did not know we'd be fighting in Iraq, for example, or something like that. So you have to remember that the financial system is a subset of the economic system. It's lifeblood, perhaps. And the economic system is a subset of the geopolitical system.
Wait. I thought the whole purpose of Americans was to serve free trade ideology, to serve various economic ideologies, to serve some system, to serve, various economic metrics. I'm feeling from this that perhaps the purpose of the American economic system should be to serve the best interests of Americans, including even those half of the population with below average IQs and who need a little bit more help than those with above average IQs.
So there's the military component, the political component, and the economic component. The way we shaped the world was to use economics as a tool for building alliances. And we were willing to give an advantage to other countries. At this point, we've grown to the point of dependency that should something happen, and they're all unpredictable, we could find ourselves in a very dangerous situation. So this is decoupling that was forced by the Cold War, but now no longer is in place. Now, does the decoupling have to be so wrenching? Well, a series of long-term negotiations with countries that benefit from this would not decouple us quickly. And I think Trump's idea, I think poorly engineered, was that a radical shift in the international system was necessary, and I'd do it in a week. So on the one hand, I can understand fully the need to decouple the United States from the world. And I understand that the world has taken for granted since 1945 that the United States presides over the world and its well-being. And that is not really a comfortable position, has never been a comfortable position for the United States. It's just a necessary one. So distinguish between the strategic reality of the world and Trump's management of it. Biden was doing it much too slowly. Trump, much too quickly.
Sort of the
Bloody ad block. It keeps popping up ads for me, imploring me to, upsell me on ad block. Bloody hell. The reason I install the ad block thing in my Chrome browser is so I don't have to deal with bloody ad pop-ups.
the New York pace of things in many ways. I mean, you mentioned the engineering, and I think you've written before about the difference between engineering and imperatives in geopolitics. The idea that imperatives is what has to happen and where we might end up, and engineering is sort of how we get there. I mean, in lots of ways, are you saying that you think that we're on a path that we inevitably will be on, and it's just how we get there that's the question?
The condition that existed in 1945 was totally unnatural to the United States. The United States is the only country free from invasion from anywhere.
Right. We had high tariff policies all until about 1947. Right. The United States became rich and stayed rich with high tariffs.
Where only the oceans matter, and the oceans are trade. So the United States is an isolationist country. That's a bad word now. Basically rested on the fact that we were invulnerable to military attacks. When they finally happened, we went to the other extreme, which is not only defeating the enemy, but finding a new enemy and then taking responsibility for trying to contain it. So we were in a position that was counter to American history. Those of us who lived through that, well, were born after it, we took it for granted. This is the American responsibility, and the world was very comfortable with this American responsibility. But it became unbalanced. It was no longer in the American interest. And this was the imperative, to reduce our exposure to the world so that we're not constantly in wars. This was the position on NATO, which is very similar to the position on financial things. We don't want to be that exposed. Now the engineering comes in. We have the imperative to reduce our exposure. How do we manage it? And there are two engineering ways. A way to ease off the system, but that leaves the danger of time, what will happen to disrupt this, or to an extreme.
Okay, speaking of danger, I want to express my empathy for my fellow Americans who are suffering through a police state. Edward Luce, American correspondent for the Financial Times, the most elite newspaper in the world, says Trump is halfway to making America a police state. I mean, just the ludicrous stuff that the mainstream media pumps out. The president's refusal to accept a Supreme Court ruling to facilitate some reverse deportation. It's a turning point, guys. It's a turning point. Guys, did you know that at noon on April 14, America ceased to have a law-abiding government? Some would argue that already happened on January 20 when Donald Trump was inaugurated. And yet people seem to be observing all the rules around me just as much as ever. Trump chose to ignore a 9-0 Supreme Court ruling to repatriate an illegally deported man. He wasn't ordered to repatriate. This guy's lying, right? He was ordered to facilitate, which is not the same as making it happen. So we're supposed to believe that the United States Supreme Court and various district courts, they can rule that they have standing to force El Salvador to turn over an El Salvadoran citizen in an El Salvadoran prison to the United States. All right, just nonsense. And somehow this is supposed to be some kind of police state. I can't believe the Democrats are going to the wall for this El Salvadoran illegal immigrant, very probably a gangbanger, and someone who beats his wife. And this is the hero for the Democrats.
Movement has run into a brick wall. I've been arguing for a long time that the right needs to focus on its human capital problem. Institutions went woke because that's the ideology of the cognitive elites. I say we need to focus on winning the battle of ideas in order to draw the elites to our side, or else the right is going to be dragged down by its low collective intelligence.
So I am all for winning the battle of ideas. But where I disagree with Nathan Cofnas, I don't believe that should be the only thing on the political agenda. I'm incredibly naive, right? I think looking after the interests of Americans should have some priority. For example, Donald Trump has crushed illegal immigration into this country and thereby dramatically improved the lives of millions of Americans. Right? We have had a restoration of law and order. We have had an end to violent left-wing Black Lives Matter Antifa riots that were burning up America, that were disrupting America. We have had a return of sanity. We have had an overturning of affirmative action and DEI through large swaths of America. So for me, naive 40, right, I don't think ideas are the only thing that matters, right? I am so naive that I think the welfare, the safety, the thriving of Americans is just as important as winning the war of ideas.
Back in February 2024, I specifically said it would be possible to mobilize the conservative mob to put Trump back in office and that he might take actions that would advance the war on woke, but I said that this wouldn't be sufficient to achieve lasting victory.
Oh my God, it would be sufficient to achieve lasting victory. I've got a newsflash. There is nothing that will achieve lasting victory. Life will go on. The left is an inherent part of the human condition. Why? Why have we had evolved left-wing instincts towards egalitarianism, towards openness to strangers, to a globalist internationalist perspective, to experimenting with innovative ways of leading a life, organizing a family? Because these left-wing tendencies have proved frequently to be highly adaptive, and that's why we carry on these left-wing tendencies, and there will always be left-wing tendencies. There were these type of left-wing tendencies thousands of years ago. There will be left-wing tendencies thousands of years from now. There will never be a victory in any kind of final sense in the political realm, because there are always going to be situations where left-wing policies and left-wing tendencies and left-wing reactions are going to be more adaptive to dealing with the threats of a particular situation than right-wing tendencies.
Mob rule by a low IQ coalition would backfire and reinforce smart people's identity as
Okay, so how dramatic do you think is the IQ difference between people who voted for Donald Trump and people who voted for Kamala Harris? Right, you would have a hard time convincing me that it's much higher than 1 point on average, right? The Democrats are the party of the upper class and the lower class. So where's the evidence that there is this dramatic difference between your average Republican and your average Democrat in IQ? I don't see it. Now, the intelligentsia is dominantly on the left. Yes, that is true. And that is something that there should be concern about. And to change that, we have to change the institutions. And the only way that the right can change institutions right now is from the top down, because the left aren't dumb. They drum the right out of any paths to power in our major institutions. So the only way for the right to take back institutions is to take them over from the top and institute change from the top down. When you change institutions and you change the availability of funding, all right, you're going to open up more and more possibilities for intellectuals to pursue status and money and popularity through non-left-wing ways.
Leftists and Democrats. People like Christopher Rufo said, I'm naive. We just need to seize power and smash the institutions of the left.
I don't think Christopher Rufo said we just need to seize power and smash the institutions of the left, and then that's the end of history. That's the final solution. No, nobody says that there's any final solution for the battle between left and right, because there will always be situations that will occur where left-wing tendencies are more adaptive, and then there will always be some situations that occur where right-wing tendencies are more adaptive. Right? You never know coming down the pike when an authoritarian, xenophobic police state is the most adaptive approach to a challenge, and then there will be other situations that come along where some kind of wide open, innovative, globalist, socialist perspective will be more useful for dealing with a particular type of situation. All right? There will always be situations where the left has better ideas, and there'll always be some situations where the right has better ideas. There's never going to be a final solution in the battle between left and right. That's incredibly naive. It's just downright stupid.
After Trump issued his executive orders against DEI, withheld funding from universities, deported some Hamas supporters, many conservatives declared that woke was dead.
Who? Name me one thoughtful conservative who declared that woke was dead, not just as dramatic attention-seeking overstatement, but for all eternity, right? People on the right tend to be connected to tradition. They tend towards a skeptical view of human nature. They tend not to be utopian. They tend to be quite resistant. They tend to be the last people in the world to be what Nathan Cofnas says, to think that there is some kind of final solution in the struggle against human nature and the struggle against enemies and the struggle against the forces of chaos and disruption. So nobody thoughtful on the right thinks that there's any kind of final solution to the human condition and to the eternal struggles between left and right.
And in January, I wrote a Substack essay, Was I Wrong About Woke?, where I said that the so-called vibe shift that everyone on the right was so excited about wasn't going to last, and that the MAGA coalition...
Yes, the vibe shift, that's shocking. It's not going to last. Nothing's going to last. All right? I'm not going to last. You're not going to last. All right? Everything will turn to dust. Everything that we work for will fall apart. Nothing lasts. But for millions of Americans, they currently enjoy a much higher quality of life because Trump was elected president. I don't know how many dozens or hundreds or thousands of Americans are simply alive today because Donald Trump was elected president and the forces of chaos and crime have been intimidated. So does the well-being, the increased safety for tens of millions of Americans not matter? And part of increasingly feeling safe is crushing illegal immigration. Psychic safety is real safety. And so halting the advance of woke and in places rolling back woke increases the mental health, the happiness, and the high functioning for tens of millions of Americans. Immediately after the election, the vibe shifted. Conversations became much healthier. What happened in workplaces and in all sorts of social settings became much less fractious, much less vicious, much more pro-social. So for me, naive me, improve quality of life for tens of millions of Americans, improve safety for tens of millions of Americans. All right, to me, that counts, that matters, even if it does not persist for the next 15,000 years. So from the perspective that Nathan Cofnas is offering here, that if the Trump vibe shift doesn't last for at least 15,000 years, then it means absolutely nothing. To me, improved quality of life for tens of millions of Americans for going on several months now, to me, that matters. Even if they are of average IQ, even if they are of below average IQ, their safety, their welfare, their happiness, right, their higher functioning, to me, that has some value. That means something. The welfare, safety, protection, and higher functioning of ordinary Americans, even if they just have a 93 IQ, to me, that's important. That's a really good thing, even if it doesn't last for 15,000 years.
Still didn't have the human capital to govern effectively or retake the culture.
Oh my God. So if the right can't retake the culture, then it's all meaningless. The culture is really vast, right? Anyone set on just completely retaking the culture is inevitably going to be frustrated. The culture is always going to slip out of your hands. Now, there was a right-wing vibe shift in the culture for about a year prior to Trump's election. Trump was elected surfing on a wave of a right-wing cultural shift. And in turn, he has contributed to the building of that wave, which has improved the quality of life for tens of millions of Americans. Now, even if it doesn't last for another 15,000 years, to me, that's significant.
And now I suggest MAGA is imploding for exactly the reason I said it would. It's pursuing.
And how is MAGA imploding? Because Richard Hanania and Nathan Cofnas and some of the other intellectuals like them are just appalled. They're shocked. They're horrified by all the bullying, the fascist Maoist bullying that Trump's engaged in. Amy Wax here is absolutely the voice of reason.
Doing idiotic, self-defeating.
Look, here's the problem with young people. They seize on often some good ideas and they pursue them to absurd lengths. And Nathan Cofnas has many great ideas, and he used to be quite the careful scholar, but he's become quite sloppy intellectually sloppy in his public pronouncements due to Trump derangement syndrome over the past month or so.
Policies reflecting its collective stupidity. Like I predicted, Trump's act.
Oh, collective stupidity. This Trump administration is just collective stupidity, really. Right? It's the most consequential presidential administration since FDR's first term. So did they get to be so incredibly consequential and powerful because they're just a bunch of morons?
Actions are sending the message that the political right isn't a place for competent thinking people.
The political right is not a place for competent thinking people because Donald Trump is such a disaster. Right? It's such a huge statement. It just strikes me as completely ludicrous. What do you say to something like that? Right? This is the problem with youth. They seize on a good idea and then they take it to absurd lengths. Nathan Cofnas has a great idea that the most effective way to combat woke culture is to note that different groups have different gifts. Right? But then he tries to extend his theory too far and travels out into realms where he doesn't know much about, and he overstates his case and looks foolish.
And even in cases where his objectives are good, the means are ham-fisted. First,
oh my God. So if you are going to be taking a lot of action, not every action you will take will be graceful. Right? This is true for the individual, for a CEO, and for a president. And good and bad, again, that just depends upon the nature of your particular hero system. And sometimes whether you do something gracefully or in a ham-fisted manner is very important. And other times that is of secondary importance compared to other considerations, sometimes just getting something done. For example, I credit Joe Biden for pulling out of Afghanistan, even though there were some bad things that happened during the pullout. Often, to get something done, you have to be willing to endure some embarrassing moments and some losses, right? It can be very smooth to allow the WTO to facilitate the rape of the American economy by the world. And stopping this rape might be a bit abrupt, right? Let's say you walk in on someone raping your sister. Stopping the rapist, you might engage in some ham-fisted tactics. And so, guys, if it comes to saving a life, stopping rape, stopping child abuse, what's most important is that you don't engage in ham-fisted tactics, right? It's not the stopping of the rape that's important. It's not the stopping of the murder that's important. It's not saving lives that's important. It's not stopping child abuse that's important. What's important is that you don't do anything ham-fisted. And the great benefit to this approach of making sure you never do anything ham-fisted is that you'll never be able to do anything. You'll just have to be passive, because in our incredibly complicated world, there is absolutely no assurance, no matter how smooth and intelligent and sophisticated your intentions, that given all the variables out there, that you'll always be able to go about things in the most smooth and sophisticated manner and never engage in anything ham-fisted, right? If you want to reduce rape, you will have to engage in many ham-fisted practices. You want to lower murder rates? And here I am. I'm an anti-murder, anti-rape, anti-child abuse activist. And I admit that stopping murder, stopping rape, stopping child abuse, stopping the rape of the American economy, that this will require some actions that won't be smooth and adroit. In fact, that they will come across as ham-fisted. And this is what a rube I am. All right, I'm from outback Australia. To me, stopping rape is more important than whether or not the means that I employ to stop rape are ham-fisted. To me, stopping terrible developments in American culture, such as DEI, right, halting that and pushing it back in some areas, to me, that's more important than whether or not the efforts are ham-fisted. To me, pushing back on left-wing dominance of our institutions is more important than whether or not some measures to push back against the enemy are ham-fisted. To me, reducing murder rates is more important than whether or not the techniques that we use to reduce murder rates are ham-fisted. To me, crushing illegal immigration is a more important goal than whether or not some methods that we use to crush illegal immigration are ham-fisted. Stopping the dominance of the left in all our institutions, and the left continually using its institutional power to oppress Americans who don't share their left-wing perspective, right? Providing some safety, some breathing space, some reasons for optimism, for a higher quality of life and higher functioning for non-leftist Americans. To me, right, improving the quality of life for hundreds of millions of Americans, that's more important to me than whether or not the methods used to improve the safety and the quality and the functioning of the lives of hundreds of millions of Americans, whether or not some of those methods might be ham-fisted, perhaps not the most sophisticated and smooth in the articulation of these procedures. But here I am. I'm just a clumsy anti-rape, anti-murder, anti-illegal immigration, anti-child abuse activist who has higher priorities than whether or not we're winning the war of ideas, whether or not we're doing things in the most smooth and sophisticated and really cool rhetoric and just very philosophically grounded and super strong epistemics. Right? To me, stopping murder, stopping rape, stopping illegal immigration, right? That's at times more important than having great epistemics. But hey, what do I know? I'm just a bloke from Australia.
The assault on universities should have been planned in collaboration with allies within academia who
The assault on universities should have been better planned. Yes, you can always plan everything better. At least Trump is taking action, right? The left has a stranglehold over our universities. And you can critique every single action that Donald Trump has taken, right? But the critique doesn't seem very strong to me if you don't recognize the enormous amount of good that he's doing, right? If you're just A-OK with the left having a stranglehold over almost all our institutions, unless we go about things in a super sophisticated, high IQ manner. It doesn't seem like a strong argument to me.
Actually know what's going on. Instead, the administration.
Oh, so the Trump administration just doesn't know what's going on. It just doesn't have a clue about really what's happening with the universities. I get the sense they have a fairly decent idea of what's going on with universities. And I think Trump and the Trump administration benefit from accurate criticism just as much as I do, and just as much as Nathan Cofnas and Amy Wax does. Like, everybody benefits from accurate criticism. There are many accurate criticisms of Donald Trump, but to only provide hysterical criticisms that Trump is acting in a fascist manner, right, which is essentially the underpinning of Cofnas's critique, that Trump is simultaneously acting in a fascist and a Maoist manner. And I just don't find that level of hysteria intellectually convincing. I just find it silly. If all you can do is crap on Donald Trump as this administration pushes back against almost all our institutions that are controlled by the left, then I would suggest that you lack perspective, that you lack wisdom.
Administration is just carpet bombing all institutions of research and learning.
So is this administration just carpet bombing all institutions of learning? So how many institutions of learning do we have in this country? Let's say we've got 500 serious institutions of learning. So how many of those institutions can you seriously argue that Donald Trump has carpet bombed? Right? You'd have a very difficult time coming to a number higher than 5. So 99% of our institutions of higher learning have not been carpet bombed by the Trump administration, which makes it difficult for me to take this hysterical critique seriously. It's just seems to me the epitome of foolishness.
Second, instead of reforming the federal bureaucracy, Trump and Musk are destroying it.
Okay, instead of reforming the federal bureaucracy. So we know on the basis of donations from federal employees that they donate to Democrats about 20-1 compared to Republicans. So their unions, their leaders, overwhelmingly in the hands of the left. And so firing, I don't know, have we fired 2%? Have we even fired 1% of federal government workers? That doesn't strike me as excessive. Have we, at most, we fired 2% of federal government workers? That just doesn't strike me as excessive. Does that seem just terribly excessive to you?
Pretty soon, Americans are going to realize that government services aren't being provided at the level that we've come to expect.
Okay, so how many millions of Americans right now are experiencing government services not being provided at the same level that they were provided prior to the Trump administration? So I read the news for a couple of hours every day, subscribe to the Financial Times and New York Times, Wall Street Journal, right? I haven't seen any evidence that more than a few thousand Americans are experiencing a significant deterioration of government services. So from everything I know, more than 99% of Americans have not experienced a significant deterioration in government services. So this kind of hysterical overstatement does not strike me as compelling. Now, what was my number one fear before Trump took power with Trump administration number 2? My number one fear was lack of competence. And I think that many of these Cofnas critiques, right, placed in appropriate context, right, are worthy of consideration. I am concerned that there may be a less efficient government in some areas due to the moves of the Trump administration. I am wide open to that. I am wide open to Trump being en masse a disaster, right? A wrecker, someone who does more harm than good, right? I am open to that, but I'm also equally open to the possibility that Donald Trump may well do more good than harm. So right now, it seems to me that overall Trump is doing more good than harm, but there is, a very strong critique about many of the things that Trump's doing, and I can listen to it. I just can't listen to it when it falls to the hysteria of, oh, it's Maoism, it's fascism, it's a police state.
Third, Trump's economic policies are stupid beyond description.
Really? And is that right? And your basis for saying that, and your level of learning in economics is what? For example, what's your level of learning on optimal trade theory? Right, this is something that economists study. That there is a whole body of economists who recognize that a country like America needs a certain level of tariffs. Right? Have you read the work of Robert Lighthizer? I'm just listening to his Audible book right now on the case for protectionism. He was Trump's trade representative in his first term. Is it just so blindingly clear that Trump's economic policies are a disaster? Because we had 4 years of Donald Trump, and it was not an economic disaster.
He's crashing the economy.
He's crashing the economy. On what basis? So the Dow Jones is down, 2% from 3%, 5% from the highs when he took over, and that's crashing the economy. We don't have widespread unemployment. We don't have widespread inflation as compared to before Trump took over. So any crashing of the economy has only occurred in some big trades on Wall Street. Not necessarily a great thing, not necessarily a bad thing, but just strikes me as hysterical overstatement.
Alienating our allies, strengthening our adversaries. And
so Trump is strengthening our adversaries. So China, how is Trump making China? China is our number one geostrategic adversary. So how has Trump strengthened China? How has Trump significantly strengthened Russia? How is Europe is often acting as our adversary with regard to trade? How is Trump dramatically strengthening the adversarial element of Europe?
Tying anti-wokeism to economic incompetence would destroy the anti-woke movement, even if Trump were getting everything else right, which he isn't. So although my ultimate goals haven't changed, I now believe that the right, as it currently exists, attracts such low human capital that it's incapable of governing effectively.
And he cites as one major example of this Vladimir Putin, who is the single most effective great power leader that this world has seen in 40 years, right? Putin took a prostrate Russia that was on its knees, and he returned it to superpower status. But to Nathan Cofnas, the incredible effectiveness of Vladimir Putin shows that the right is low human capital and is incapable of governing, right? The most effective great power leader of the last 40 years shows that the right is incapable of governing.
Instead of seeking power prematurely, the right should focus on refuting the equality thesis, the idea that all groups of people.
God forbid that the right focuses on improving the lives of hundreds of millions of Americans. All right, Donald Trump has already improved the lives of hundreds of millions of Americans by rolling back woke, by rolling back affirmative action, by rolling back the transgender mania, and by crushing illegal immigration. So to me, improving the quality of life for hundreds of millions of Americans is a good thing.
People have the same average potential, which is the belief that generates wokeism. So, Amy, where do you stand?
There's a lot there. I will say, first of all, that I am a little dismayed by the kind of Trump derangement syndrome that has spread to the opinionators like you and Richard Hanania and Philippe Lemoyne and other people that I generally follow on Twitter, that has degenerated into a kind of almost hysterical name calling and disdain and sneering. I actually don't think that's very helpful. It's not very helpful to me, okay, because I'm ensconced in academia. I get questions from students like, I walk into a seminar and they say, what do you think of tariffs? And it's not helpful to me for, reading material of people I respect that says Trump is an idiot, tariffs are idiotic, There's nothing, to them. There's no argument possible in favor of them. That sort of extreme rhetoric, I think, is disappointing. All right. So how would I go about thinking about what is happening right now? I wouldn't focus so much on low human capital, although frankly, the right now is outgunned and outclassed and out-rhetoriced, and part of it is because the people in academia, the opinionator class, the elites, are very smart, very wily, very sneaky, right? So they are very formidable opponents, and I will get to that in a minute when we talk about what's happening, what Trump is trying to do to the universities. But I think it really helps to step back and ask, what was Trump elected to do by his base? What did he promise them? What is going on? And I think one of the things that's going on is he was elected by Main Street to tame Wall Street, right? And when I say Wall Street, I mean the investor class, the Davos class, cosmopolitans, the ruling opinionator, lefty elites, the whole 9 yards, right? Because Main Street, ordinary working, mostly guys, not college educated, mostly.
So I'm a big fan of this book by Robert Lighthizer. It's called No Trade is Free, Changing Course, Taking on China, and Helping America's Workers.
White, they feel neglected, they feel left out, they feel like their values and their interests are ignored, right? So Trump says, I see you, I hear you, I'm going to help you, all right? Now, how do you do that? It's not easy. It's very, very difficult. What I'm not hearing from you, Hanania, all these other, right-wing bros, is the ones who are, fervently anti-DEI, basically aligned with Trump on a lot of issues. What I'm not hearing is, what do we do for these people? What do we owe these people? How can we help them? Okay. I don't hear any positive program. And you know what? Maybe there is none. Maybe,
I have many criticisms of this Trump administration. I do not like the way that Trump treats our allies. I do not like the way that Trump is encouraging Europe and our other allies to get more deeply into bed with China. I would like us to work together with our allies to get a handle on China.
Tariffs aren't at the end of the day going to help them. Maybe when you target Wall Street, you can't help but target Main Street because our economy is so globalized, it's so very intercalated. Maybe that's just a fantasy. Onshoring production is maybe not going to work, or it's going to have so many costs and side effects that it's going to.
So Nathan Cofnas wrote on Twitter that the low IQ left and the low IQ right meet together in fascism, which is nonsense. Fascism is a movement of the right, right? The left and the right have different meanings, right? These are real distinctions, right? They have different practical characteristics rooted in their core values, right? Conflating them, especially and calling them fascism, is just nonsense, right? Left and right mean something, right? Fascism is a right-wing ideology. It doesn't fuse with left-wing principles, right? Political left is known for egalitarianism, right? Social, economic, cultural equality, progressive taxation, wealth redistribution, right? Affirmative action to reduce disparities, collective welfare, right? Looking after marginalized groups, social progress, right? Innovative ways of forming families, such as gay marriage, skepticism of hierarchy, skepticism of the power of race and ethnicity. And the left is globalist. It supports international cooperation, free immigration, multiculturalism, right? Borders, national borders, not viewed as particularly sacred from a left-wing perspective. So practical examples: universal basic income, decriminalizing drugs, right? Decriminalizing all sorts of behavior. To be on the right is to be for harsher punishment of norm violators. Climate change initiatives, right? A globalist perspective, right? Labor strikes, civil rights campaigns, anti-imperialist protests. These are all movements of the left. I got this from Grok, right? I said, what are the clear practical distinguishing characteristics of the political right and left, right? The idea that the low IQ left and right join in fascism is silly. Left and right mean something, right? So that's what I said to Grok. Grok agreed with me. Political right, hierarchy, order, right? Social structure, family, religion, class, race, institutions that maintain tradition and authority, strong military, law enforcement, Hierarchy is normal, natural, and healthy from a right-wing perspective. There is not nearly the drive to make everything equal for everybody, right? From a right-wing perspective, life is tough, and different people have different capabilities, that different groups have different gifts, and it's just silly to try to ensure that everybody has the same economic outcome. Cultural continuity, you defend established norms and practices such as heterosexual marriage, right? To be on the right is to have much more fear of outsiders, much more skepticism about immigration, secularism, and progressive social policies such as same-sex marriage. To be on the right is to be nationalistic, to be racist, right? To prioritize the sovereignty, the safety, and the welfare of your particular people. To be on the right often means favoring protectionist trade policy, strict border control, strong militaries, limited government, little interest in big international affairs, right? Fascism is a right-wing phenomenon. It's not a left-wing phenomenon. It's ultra-nationalist. It's hierarchical. It's leader-centric. It is not obsessed that everybody has to have an equal outcome. Its obsession instead is with a mythic national identity and a militarist society, right? Where you have law and order and nationalism, right? The idea that the low IQ left and right merge into fascism ignores their completely incompatible goals. Now, you have left-wing authoritarianism such as Stalin, which can share some tactics with right-wing authoritarianism, but its aim, class equality, universalism, completely contradicts fascism's elitist nationalist core. Right-wing authoritarianism such as military juntas can resemble fascism, but they lack its totalitarian mobilization and its cult of personality. So left and right, they have real meaning. They don't merge.
Be a net negative. I mean, all of that stuff, I think, needs to be discussed in a systematic.
Okay, let's get Michael back on the show. What's going on, man?
40, how are you?
I'm good, bro.
So I'm not that familiar with Cofnas's take, and I've been kind of multitasking, so I didn't really listen to that clip that you're playing. But I think when you talk about someone like Richard Hanania, who is like in a similar space, and you've mentioned him too, I think that the reason that these guys tend to be anti-Trump and kind of go out of their way to take shots at Trump and his supporters is because Hanania is kind of out there, like he said some edgy stuff. And so he feels like it behooves him to just mitigate that, to say, oh, but by the way, I don't like Trump. So there's that, you know? So I think they have kind of a perverse incentive to get out there, like on social media, and it's like a status signal. And that's not necessarily towards Cofnas, because like I just don't know, but that's definitely my take on Hanania, is that that's his way of showing it's to show that he's superior to other people. It's contrarian, and it's also just to mitigate some of the edgy things that he said in the past.
Yeah, I mean, to be an elite is to loathe Trump, and if that's your primary social circle, it'd be very difficult not to just show how much you despise Donald Trump.
Yeah, and it's so out of step with, if you look at the proportion of Republicans that support Trump, like 90%, and it's been 90% for a while. It's been that way, like during the primaries. Like the Michael Wolff book that we were talking about discussed the 2024 primary when Trump was so dominant. And yet, if you look at the elite, even conservative media was boosting Nikki Haley. The Wall Street Journal wrote an editorial for Nikki Haley. So there's like this huge weird incentive to be against Trump, but then you're not representing just normal Republican voters.
Yeah, and have you been bemused, as I have, at the absolute assurance of people who don't know anything about economics that free trade is the only possible trading policy, right? The people who don't know anything just stating with complete assurance that any compromise with free trade is a disaster.
Yeah, but I will say, 40, I was listening to your last show, which was great content as always, but I feel like you kind of buried the lead, is the harshest criticism I can give you, because you're talking about the tariffs, and I think we have to admit Trump really backed down on all the tariffs except for China. So am I missing something, or what? I mean, did you comment on that in like hour
Well,
three?
my main commentary is that I have contempt for those who, number one, don't know anything about economics, but simultaneously proclaim that free trade is the only possible trade policy. I'm not here to say that Trump is right. I'm not here to say that Trump is doing a good thing. I'm not here to say that Trump's trade policies are the best policies. I'm not here to defend Donald Trump, but I have contempt for the universal elite media 100% condemnation of Trump's trade policies and their attitude that there is no possible compromise to be made with free trade. That's my objection. My objection is not to criticism of Donald Trump. It doesn't matter to me. I'm not invested one way or another in Trump's trade policies. I'm not defending his tariffs. I'm not attacking his tariffs. The world's a too complicated place. I recognize that there is a case to be made for some sort of protectionist trade policy. It doesn't really matter to me whether Trump backs down or whatever the opposite of backs down steps up. I don't think in terms of, oh no, Trump is backing down, or oh no, Trump has suffered a humiliation. That just is of zero concern to me. What is of concern to me is when there's an intellectual climate where there is only one perspective allowed, and that is that we must be balls to the wall free trade, and any compromise with that is idiotic, stupid, moronic, is Maoist, is fascist, and is determined to crash the economy. That elite media only looks at trade through the lens of free trade is the only possible policy that the United States should follow. And people who don't know anything about economics and trade policy are just stating this with absolute assurance that any disagreement with them just shows you're a moron and Trump's a moron and that you're trying to be a Maoist and a fascist. That I have contempt for. All right. The lack of recognition that there may be other perspectives aside from the free trade perspective, the absolute contempt for any compromise with free trade, that gets my ire.
Oh, sure, 100% on that. But it's not even about supporting Trump, not supporting Trump. Now, I think it's bad that he backed down, but I still support Trump on net, like easily. The problem is that the whole question of whether tariffs work is now entirely as it has been, for decades. Like, we'll literally never know what the outcome might have been or could be, because if we just have a tariff on China, then obviously we can just import goods from other countries like in Southeast Asia. And so the entire experiment is totally off. I mean, it was just like an epic catastrophe. And I can understand that there's reasons why he backed off, and you can argue that it just wasn't worth it. And it was just politically, he didn't want to spend all his political capital on this one issue, and he tried to find a compromise. But the concept of bringing factories back to the United States is now over. Like, it's literally not going to happen.
I think you're completely wrong about that. He didn't back off 10% tariffs, right? He laid out 10% tariffs on other nations of the world. There's no 90-day pause on the 10% tariffs, right? They're still there. He has dramatically raised tariffs, and that's still the policy of the United States. And the new trade policy is apparently bringing in $2 billion a year for the United States Treasury that would not otherwise be there. Reshoring has been a major trend in the United States over the past 8 years or so, and it's still a major trend. So we have instituted significant tariffs already that Trump has not backed off of. We are seeing a significant amount of reshoring. And now you can argue about whether we should have more or less, but we certainly had a significant move towards tariffs. We are now negotiating trade policies with upwards of 70 countries. So I don't know. Maybe Trump won't be able to arrange superior deals. All right. I'm not here to tell you that Trump is right, and I'm not here to tell you that Trump is winning, and I'm not here to tell you that Trump's tariff move is genius. What I am here to tell you is that any assertion that Trump's trade policies are anything less than a 100%, I'm getting confused here, asserting that Trump's trade policies are absolutely, clearly 100% a disaster, that to me is arrogant, right? We don't know what kind of trade deals he negotiates. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or next week. The world's an incredibly complicated place. I've got an open mind whether or not Trump's trade policies work out in the best interest of the United States. 50% of me says they won't, and 50% of me says that they will. But I don't know why you would think that this discredits tariffs when he has kept in place the 10% tariffs, and we are renegotiating all of our major trade deals, and we would not have been able to do so without this emergency declaration, right? So far, during the 40 plus years that we have been operating and working within the WTO, we have only been fucked, right? The United States has never had a WTO ruling in the interests of the American worker. So after 40 years of being raped by the WTO, and the only way to bring an end to our current trade policies that are raping this country is to declare an emergency, which is what Trump did. And he unilaterally installed 10% tariffs against everybody. And he is unilaterally, under this emergency declaration, saying that we're going to renegotiate our major trade deals. He could not have done this following the normal rules of the WTO. He had to do something like this dramatic, and by showing people that he was willing to crash the financial markets, right? That he is willing to go balls to the wall. I suspect that there is a good case to be made that will produce trade deals that are more in the interest of the United States than if he had not shown the willingness to crash the markets. Pass.
Okay. Hopefully you're right. Yeah, you have a much more optimistic take, and maybe you are right. I don't know. My gut reaction was that like 10% is not going to do it, because I just assumed that our labor cost is much more than 10% to make up the difference between like Vietnam. And in my mind, you really needed like extremely high tariffs if you actually wanted to bring manufacturing back. But I mean, maybe you're right. It seems that we have these trade deficits, but it is a very confusing issue. And it is my position, okay, obviously, that we should have tariffs and try to bring manufacturing back. And you say that might be happening to some extent. And if that's true, then that's good. But I'm not like super dogmatic about it that you can't disagree with me in good faith. I think there are smart people and there are conservative people who say, oh, actually, just the economy changed now and we export service goods. There was a big editorial in the Wall Street Journal on that topic, that they just very carefully made the case that we export things like marketing and we export things like finance, and they showed. But I don't. Is that figured into the trade deficit? I don't know. It just seems.
Yeah, it's still we do export services, but our trade deficit, it hardly makes a dent in the trade deficit. Someone noted that Trump has this unique ability to create a laser-like focus on a topic that otherwise just scrapes by. And Trump has done this with DEI, and now he's doing it with tariffs. I mean, tariffs are now the number one topic of national conversation for the past 3 weeks, and that's never happened before in our lifetime. So Trump has this unique ability to focus attention on a particular issue. I like that tariffs is such an important topic of discussion right now in this country, and has been for going on 3 weeks. I think that's extraordinary.
Yeah, and I'm just, okay, I know that you're not looking at it through the frame of Trump good or Trump bad. And I agree that's, that can be silly and petty. But you do have to say that he really was out there with, we cannot back down. Don't be a panic, and I will never waver. And I was like, wow, this is kind of heroic what he's saying. And he literally doesn't care that the market is crashing. It's something. And you have to say he did do a 180. And I know you're not in it for the kind of red team, blue team type of stuff, and that's good. But just to make a separate point, if you look at the kind of conservative influencers, it was kind of ridiculous how they said, aha, now this is what Trump meant the whole time. It's like, I don't think he meant that. He was very clearly stating that he was not going to change course, and then he certainly did do a 180. So it doesn't mean that it's not still a net positive. It doesn't mean, as you say, that perhaps we're still going to improve the situation with trade, but it wasn't a good look. And I think I made it clear that I support Trump, but let's get real. Like, that was a little embarrassing.
Yeah, it didn't look good, but there are so many things more important than looking cool. For example, pulling out of Afghanistan was the right thing to do, even though it got messy, and showing that you're willing to crash the world economy and the American economy in your desire to remake the American economy. That may, in the fullness of time, be shown to be a disaster, but I think there's almost equally as good a chance to say that that was necessary to secure the kind of trade deals that we need to make America stronger again. The bond market may have been more important than Wall Street. Once 10-year Treasury yields, or was it 30 years, going up past 5%, that was when Trump wavered. And so now we've got them back down to 4.3%. We always live in a situation, and the situation is constantly changing, and what's the appropriate policy in one particular situation ceases to be an appropriate policy in a different situation. So when the world around you changes, it makes sense to change with it, and it also makes sense rhetorically to say, I will never change, but it pragmatically makes sense to then completely go back on your word. There's a reason that people are constantly contradicting themselves and going back on their word, because we live in a very confusing and challenging world.
Yes, and also there's the internal battle within the Trump administration about what is the right thing to do. And from what I believe it was from the New York Times, had some good reporting on this, which is that, as you know, Peter Navarro is the pro-tariff guy, and he was the one pushing for the kind of maximal tariffs. But then on the free trade side was Elon Musk, and then he has some guys in there who likewise are not in favor of the tariffs. And so it just kind of seemed the Commerce Secretary, Bassett, Lutnick, these guys were against the tariffs. So there was an internal debate. There were bad indicators in the stock market, and it seems like Navarro lost that debate. Elon Musk called him dumber than a sack of bricks, which he's not. He went to Harvard. He has a PhD in economics from Harvard. But Peter Navarro took it pretty good. Like, this is a guy with a sense of humor. So he's asked about Elon Musk calling him a moron, and he kind of laughs it off. So I can appreciate that he's still like a voice in the administration.
Yeah, and I don't think it's necessarily a good thing to have the administration singing out of the same hymn book. There are times and circumstances where you want people singing out of the same hymn book, but in an incredibly complicated world, let's hear different arguments and let different approaches to trade, let them fight it out in the public sphere and have different parts of the Trump administration arguing for different policies. Let's have one big national conversation about tariffs. Now, according to the elite media, there's only one perspective you can have on tariffs, and that they are bad. But for regular Americans, they tend to have a fairly positive view towards tariffs. And I just think it's fantastic that for more than 3 weeks now, the number one topic of political discussion has been tariffs. That has never happened in my lifetime. Let's have a good discussion. Let's hear different perspectives, and I'm excited about that.
Well, the other big topic has been Kilmar Obrega Garcia. Does that ring a bell?
Yes. The El Salvadoran illegal immigrant, possibly gangbanger and a wife beater.
The media is so pissed that we deported this guy. And it's like, if there's going to be this much fuss about one guy, like, we're never going to make any progress. I think that's kind of the point, is what I'm starting to think.
Well, now, I will give the left credit. It's not the guy. Their problem is, did the Trump administration ignore or defy the courts? And so the belief that we have a rule of law and that we have three branches of government, including the judiciary, and the judiciary has power to push back against the executive branch and the congressional branch, right? That is worthy of fighting for, right? Due process is worthy of fighting for. I don't think that non-Americans and illegal aliens have any right to due process. But I understand the left-wing perspective. That there are reasons to be concerned about the Trump administration being out of control and possibly defying the courts. So I grant a great deal of legitimacy to the left-wing concern about this. It's not the person, really. The person is just a vehicle for them to express their outrage at what looks to them, and they may be right, the Trump administration defying courts.
Well, they picked a really bad vehicle, and it's kind of funny. It's nothing against El Salvador, by the way. I've been to El Salvador recently, and it's very cool. And everyone loves the President Bukele, and he's a very reasonable guy. But yeah, they picked a very bad guy to make their poster boy. And it's just very unfortunate that they seem to be extremely adamant that an MS-13 member be returned to the United States immediately. It's like, it's very hard for people to understand that. And the issue at hand, like, we seem to be debating whether he really is an MS-13 or not. And what I've seen, it kind of seems like he is. I mean, there's a police report, I believe is in Baltimore. And according to the police report, the police said he was an MS-13. That was their assertion. So it's not like, Sean Hannity said that. The police said that. They're not like the Republican police. They were just looking at the facts. And I believe that their evidence was that he was seen, he was with guys that were in MS-13. And the police asked him, like, well, who are these guys? He's like, oh, I don't know them. He's like, but you're with them. Like, you're in this, here's a picture of you with them. He's like, I don't know who they are. I don't know why I was with them. So, like, Ford, would you be in a picture with people in a gang and then claim not to know who they are?
It depends, but it doesn't really matter. The point is, did the Trump administration defy court? So this guy could be a gangbanger, a kiddie fiddler, a sex trafficker, and it makes no difference. All sorts of important legal rulings have been with cases with really bad people. So just because this guy's a bad guy doesn't mean that the left and the center's concern about due process is ipso facto wrong. So it doesn't really matter how many people this guy may have killed, how many children he may have abused, and how many women he may have beaten, and how much sex trafficking he engaged in. What matters is the law and the legal process, and you don't have to be a righteous man to play a significant role in legal proceedings. There's absolutely no connection between how righteous you are and how important legal rulings are with regard to you. Like, all sorts of important legal rulings have come down with regard to really bad people.
Right. I just feel like due process at the moment seems to mean just whatever Democrats want. I heard when this case first was happening, so Trump was deporting people under the Alien and Enemies Act of 1798, John Adams, which, so I heard Alan Dershowitz talking about that, and his take was like, you don't even need to say Alien and Enemies Act, like, you can just deport them. But I just think it's a little problematic to say that due process means complying with what a judge says, because sometimes judges say something and then it's overturned by an appeals court. So it seems like an extremely gray area, the extent to which a judge can say, bring this guy back. And then if you can say, well, the Supreme Court said, like, bring this guy back. I mean, it's just crazy. I'm getting to the point where maybe we can just compromise and bring him back and then just, like, send him back again. Would everybody be happy then?
Yeah, and he's never going to be free in the United States, and so it may be the most judicious thing to bring him back and then expel him and go through the legal hurdles. From my perspective, I don't believe that non-citizens, particularly anyone in the country illegally, I don't believe in due process for them. But I don't venerate the Supreme Court. Fuck the Supreme Court. Once you reach the level of depravity of same-sex marriage, all right, the legal system has become so foul from my perspective that I have no intellectual or moral respect for it. I urge pragmatic accommodation with the rule of law. don't destroy your life, don't deteriorate society, and don't engage in actions that will trigger a reaction that will deteriorate this country. But I have no veneration for our rule of law once we have same-sex marriage. That is such a level of depravity that my attitude is just fuck the Supreme Court. Like I have so much loathing and contempt for our judicial system, and it goes to Obergefell. Once we had Obergefell, it dramatically changed my relationship with the United States of America. The United States of America became a fundamentally foul legal system once we had same-sex marriage, and we need to do the best we can. I don't recommend people go around saying fuck the Supreme Court. Don't engage in any behavior that will hurt you, hurt other people, or will trigger your opponents to engage in destructive behavior. But I cannot accord any moral respect or empathy, or I have zero veneration for our legal system. Don't violate it. Don't be an ass. But once you reach the level of depravity of sanctifying and legalizing and trying to sacralize same-sex marriage, you have taken our legal system into a sewer, and I'm not going to deny that our legal system and our Supreme Court lives in a sewer.
Yeah, I mean, now you're onto something. I think the Supreme Court is just like responding to whatever is in the culture, basically, and they're obviously fallible human beings. If you look at them, it seems like a lot of them just pretend to be conservative their whole career just to get nominated, and then pull this kind of subversive move where they take their mask off. It seems like they do things out of cowardice. But sometimes, yeah, no, I agree. I have a very nihilistic attitude, and so I agree with you. But
the institutions of our country are controlled by people who live in a sewer, from my perspective. And I'm not going to self-destruct over it, but there are levels of depravity that people in a society and a legal system and institutions can reach, where I no longer have any respect or empathy. You have just taken everything that's sacred to me, and you have immersed it in the sewer, and you are holding it under the sewer for going on a decade now. And so I am going to do the best I can to navigate an America that has become increasingly hostile to everything that I hold as sacred. But I'm not going to pretend that America hasn't taken that which I hold sacred and drowned it in a sewer for the past 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, that's all you can do. All you can do is just try to, get your own corner of the universe and just try to have fun, because that's pretty much how it is. But did you see this Democrat senator who was literally flying to El Salvador to try to get the MS-13 member back? Imagine if Democrat politicians cared about you as much as they do about foreign gang members. Like, they love them. You, they don't like, but
yeah, it's amazing to me when there are so many really good bases for criticizing the Trump administration that this is the hill that they choose to die on. To some extent,
my point. Yes,
but I got to give them credit for it, right? They are going to bat for seemingly a despicable person because the principles at stake are so important to them. So I actually give them credit for their willingness to go to bat and to die on this hill over due process for a despicable person.
Because there's like a lot of people that are not here legally that could be very sympathetic, that are literally just working, and that's it. Like, they're just working, period. So they picked an unusual hill to die on, but they literally always do this. They find like the craziest, most aggressive, antisocial person, and then it's like, well, we'll see what Trump does, and I find it crazy, and it might be due process. You might be right, but the media, I've never seen them so amped up about anything as this one guy. So I just find it extraordinary, and I just have just like common sense. I just I don't think it's going to work for them. So they're welcome to keep going to the bat for Kilmar, Obrego, Garcia. So I'll sign out on that. 40. Thanks for having me
Thanks,
on.
bro.
Appreciate
Yep.
it.
Yep. Good to talk to you. So, a conservative constitutional law professor by the name of Josh Blackman writes for Volok, the Volok Conspiracy, say law blog, and he says, I have a hard time getting worked up over revoked security clearances. Look, as long as America's institutions are dominantly in the hands of the left, and the left wants to promote same-sex marriage and other abominations, then I have some hostility towards American institutions and those leaders of America and those institutions in America that insist on taking everything that I hold sacred and drowning it in a sewer, taking kittens that I adore and drowning them in a sewer. I have loathing for these individuals and these institutions that take kittens and drown them in sewers, that take everything that is sacred and drowns it in a sewer. I find that reprehensible. And so I don't get worked up over Trump bullying these despicable left-wingers and their institutions like Harvard and Big Law. Right? Big Law's all behind gay marriage. Big Law played a huge role in making gay marriage the law of the land. Big Law played a huge role in taking everything that I find sacred and drowning it in a sewer. So fuck Big Law and fuck the U.S. Supreme Court and fuck the American legal system that took everything that was decent and drowned it in a sewer. Fuck you. I hate you. I loathe you. So Josh Blackman says, I have a hard time getting worked up over revoked security clearance. Yeah, I have a hard time getting worked up over Trump bullying these despicable left-wing institutions who have drowned everything decent in a sewer. So Josh Blackman says, remember when the Obama administration pressured Baker Hostetler to drop its representation? So left-wing Democratic presidents have pressured big law firms all the time to do what they wanted and to pressured American institutions all the time to do what they wanted and bullied American institutions all the time to do what they wanted. So finally we got a bully on the right who's pushing back and good, right? I agree with Josh Blackman. I have a hard time getting worked up over Trump bullying these despicable left-wing institutions. For the past 2 decades, conservatives have been systematically excluded from big law and from most American institutions from any position of power. Right? One attorney, Paul Clement, was pushed out of 2 big law firms for his temerity to represent conservative causes. All right? A lawyer at a big law firm, Hogan Lovells, was fired for trying to defend same-sex, to defend traditional definition of marriage. Right? Big law associates routinely forced to do pro bono work on left-wing causes. Right? You won't find any of America's 100 biggest firms filing any kind of amicus brief in support of abortion restrictions. Right? Big law firms have decided that they will consistently take left-wing ideological positions. Conservatives be damned. Right? They thought that was good for business. Well, fuck them. These purveyors of filth that drown everything that I hold sacred in a sewer. Well, fuck them. I hope Trump bullies the shit out of them. And I'm not someone who swears very much. This is how much I loathe these institutions. All right, and is this unprecedented? What Trump is doing? No, left-wing presidents did it all the time. The Obama administration pressured Baker Hostetler to drop its representation of a conservative cause. The government routinely applies pressure to private entities to achieve its goals that they cannot do so directly. The government funds NGOs to carry out its left-wing agenda to do things that they cannot do directly, right? How do we have all these NGOs with billions of funding, right, taking care of and essentially encouraging massive waves of millions of illegal immigrants, right? The government funds NGOs who then subsidize and encourage people to pour into this country illegally. Well, screw them. I hope Trump bullies the heck out of them. Right? It seems there's only outrage when conservatives fight back. Right? Trump, to his credit, he did his actions publicly. He provided the reasons for them. The public, the judiciary, they can then assess the validity of Trump's actions. Right? all the things Trump's doing, it's extraordinary how out in the open he is.
Do what Trump did, wreck the system, and then rebuild it to the point we want. So he doesn't intend to abandon the world trading system. He no longer thinks the United States can withstand the risks of that system and the cost of that system, and wants to re-engineer that. But
so supposedly then this renders you a moron, an imbecile, an idiot, and someone who wants to destroy the economy and turn it into a Maoist fascist state. Right? To me, George Friedman's perspective seems reasonable.
he began by informing the world that we were prepared to wreck it, and then quickly backing off.
So do people in the real world sometimes develop stronger bargaining positions by showing how far they are willing to go? Yes, that's how the world works, right? Showing how far you're willing to go gives you more bargaining power.
Off from that position as the American economy panicked and shifted to a more realistic position, which is this has to be engineered. Now, Trump is not an engineer, but he is a negotiator. He's very comfortable sitting at the table and bargaining. And he knows that when he bargains, he doesn't come in with the lowest price or what he thinks is a reasonable price. He comes in with a much higher price. So when you're selling something, that's the way you do it. And in this case, you may well say he overdid it and did it too quickly. But certainly,
do you think it would diminish my happiness? Do you think I'd feel less secure? Do you think I would suffer low self-esteem if I recognize that Trump made some mistakes? Like, I couldn't care less, right? There are many very strong, valid criticisms of Donald Trump. It doesn't really matter to me whether Trump is winning or losing. The only thing I have contempt for is the perspective that there is not any reason to believe that any of Trump's trade policies might work out in Americans' favor.
certainly everybody's ready to come to the table now. And that was one of the issues.
So why is America worse off when all the major trading partners of the United States, aside from China, are eager to come to the table and to reach a new trade deal? Like, why are we automatically worse off because of this? I don't see how that is just automatically bad for America.
There seemed to be the other countries no reason to bargain on this. Everything was fine. There was no reason to negotiate. And it was very difficult to get into negotiations. We did with some countries. British were willing to talk and so on. But with the critical countries, the third world countries on which we became heavily dependent on during the Cold War to their benefit, they saw no need nor imperative to negotiate. So the engineering was to create the imperative. And now we will end in a period.
So Trump showed he was willing to crash the financial markets, and he created an imperative for all our big trading partners to come strike a deal. That doesn't strike me as a ludicrous move for Trump to make. It may, in the end, be the wrong move, but it doesn't ipso facto 100% just mark itself as an imbecilic move. I don't see that.
Period of long negotiations, but under pressure, under an example of what could happen.
I mean, what do you think he wants out of these negotiations with countries like, let's say, Vietnam or Cambodia or Germany? What does he want?
The potential of stability, even if it's very operatic and historical internally at the moment. He wants to.
Have you ever known an American president or just any figure in America who has the ability to concentrate the nation and its talking class on one issue like Trump consistently does last 3 weeks with regard to tariffs? It's extraordinary how he captures attention and drives it to one particular issue.
Disengage to the extent that we have developed a dependency on the world, not financial dependency, but material dependency, the inflow of products that drive our economy. And that's a dangerous position to be in.
So do you think that and perhaps this is, you might say this is not really relevant to the big picture, but do you think the move last week to put a 90-day hold on tariffs with countries other than China was sort of all part of the plan, or do you think it was a matter of, he was overeager with his plans initially?
I have no idea. I do not know Donald Trump. I do not know how brilliant he is. In a way, it was a brilliant step. 1 week of chaos followed by a completely different atmosphere in the world, where the United States is no longer regarded as reliable. The United States does not want, on the whole, to be reliable for the world. We are not a charitable organization. In World War II, we had reasons. After World War II, we had reasons. Now the world can fend for itself more. And so I think that if I assume he's rational, he did the rational thing, throw open the door for 1 week to what could be possible, and then settle down to reasonable negotiations. On the other hand, if he's irrational, he did the same thing and is going to receive the same outcome. If he didn't expect the chaos of the global markets, particularly the American markets, then I think he was irrational. But history is impersonal. History teaches lessons very fast. And so if Trump was not thinking clearly, reality clarified his thought, as well as several advisors. So in a way, it doesn't really matter. The focus of the world is always on leaders, as if they are free players. They're not. They're in a world of reality, and they're leaders because they're highly realistic. Dreamers do not become heads of state. They claw their way up by being realistic. And Trump is a realist. Now, did he realize that this would be the outcome? I suspect not this extreme. But then he responded very responsibly. He didn't say I was wrong or anything, or oops, or any of the normal things you should say. He said, I planned this all along.
So Trump is enjoying some success vis-a-vis big law in particular, but big law is definitely winning the narrative war against MAGA and against Trump. So all news coverage shows Trump in a negative light for his moves against big law. And why is this true? Well, the powerful determine the winning narrative, and the left control almost all our institutions, particularly our cultural and media institutions. So big law is winning the narrative battle against Donald Trump. So in a sense, that indicates that big law and our big institutions are more powerful than the President of the United States, right? The President of the United States is in some sense a plucky underdog, right? The mainstream media portrays Donald Trump as having the power, and he's just bullying our institutions, bullying Harvard and big law. But all our institutions and Harvard and big law, they're all winning the narrative battle. They're winning 100% the narrative victories, which, given that the narrative is determined by the powerful, indicates that Trump, the President of the United States, is really the plucky underdog as he battles American institutions that are overwhelmingly aligned with the left.
Way. The other thing that's going on that I don't hear enough discussion about, although it's very related to indirectly to tariffs and to what Trump is trying to do with the universities, right? He's trying to cut the universities down to size. The universities and the class it represents are immensely powerful. They're like a fourth estate, okay? And I think one of the things that he's trying to do, however crudely, however coarsely, and perhaps however ineffectually, is shrink that sector. And I am all for that. I think if the university sector were a third of its current size, that would be better for America. Now, how is this related to the working class?
We had some sound problems, so Amy switched to her iPhone, which luckily we were able to import before the tariffs were imposed.
About taming the university sector. To make my point, I'm going to tell a little anecdote. So my husband, who's kind of getting, to retirement age, he loves to work with his hands. And recently, 2 of our very old cars broke down, and we got sticker shock at how much it would cost to repair them. So he said, I'd really love to learn how to be an auto mechanic. So he looked into how do you become an auto mechanic? Well, you can't go to Harvard or any of the local colleges and get, federal student loans to become an auto mechanic. You have to go to one of these proprietary schools and sign up for a course and shell out $25,000, $30,000 out of pocket to learn to be an auto mechanic. And that is that is a big, heavy lift for a lot of working.
Okay, we got a decline in the quality of the sound, but still worth listening to the full 58 minutes of Amy Wax talking with Nathan Cofnas.
Yippee.
You can't tell. But again, stop focusing on leaders. Focus on the reality in which they live.
I mean, in some ways, this comes back to your Adam Smith earlier, which we might touch on in a second. But just before that, I mean, you've often said, and it's often the case of US geopolitics, that although often people in the West and inside the US see, US action as inherently logical, many other countries around the world don't, and particularly those countries that might not consider themselves allies of the US often see the US as cowboys or as people who are unpredictable. I mean, in one way, though, the US economy, the US markets have always been financially rational. But as we see, the dollar fall and bond yields fluctuate, I mean, is the US now at risk of losing its economic credibility?
Credibility is nice. Credit is more important. So by that, I mean, how could the United States lose its credibility? We are the massive economy in the world, the massive military force in the world, the most influential political power. You don't lose that. I mean, it may be that a billionaire, let's say Musk, went berserk. He would still be a billionaire. And his credibility less than that. And the world has always regarded the United States as childish. There was always a sense that they were not as sophisticated and as aware of the realities. The Americans were very aware of the realities. For example, we all came from Europe or Asia or somewhere else. We know these places much better than those places know us. So regarding us as irrational or childish or somehow provincial, a provincial billionaire who's come to town to hick, is really misreading America. Remember, we're a nation of immigrants. I come from Hungary. I bear the memories of my parents of European life. I know Europe. I've been back to Europe. Americans travel. So we're quite sophisticated. And we did what we did in ordering the world, not for the benefit of the world, but for the benefit of the United States. We are not the almanoser, as they say, the charitable organization that the world would like us to see, and see us as irrational when we say, no, game's over. Next game.
Let's talk about Adam Smith for a moment, because in many ways this all sort of works in there. Adam Smith is, of course, famous for his theory of the invisible hand in the markets, but you sort of see an invisible hand in geopolitics here, and again, that we're moving towards this somewhat inevitable outcome.
Well, Adam Smith argued that if individuals are allowed to follow their personal interest, it would lead to the wealth of nations, as he defined it in his book. That is, to the well-being of nations. And that if governments intervene into this process, they disrupt this, they give rules and so on and so forth. Now, in geopolitics, the same thing is true, except there are not individuals, but nations. And nations have their interests. And in this world, if they pursue their interests, it can be assumed that something will emerge that will work. So, for example, after World War II, during World War II, the world met geopolitically. What emerged from that was the inevitable destruction of Germany, the inevitable...
Okay, so Saturday Night Live, left-wing institution, but many of its comedy sketches are quite transgressive. So last Saturday night, you've got this gay couple showing up to a dinner party, and they're saying, oh, we're on the baby's schedule. And so the other people say, whose baby is that? Excuse me, it's ours. I can't play it. I'll just get copyright violations. All right, this is incredibly transgressive bit here on Saturday Night Live. It's called New Parents on Saturday Night Live. Excuse me, it's ours. But wait, but how? I'm sorry, but gay people can't have a baby? Yeah, but like, where did it come from? Excuse me. Wow, you are not allowed to talk like that. That is so invasive. Okay, but like, we were with you last night and you did not have a baby. Yeah, and you guys said that after dinner you were going to go to a rave, and now today you have a baby? How did this happen? I'm sorry. Why is it when it's us in interrogation? I don't ask you why you're poor. We're just wondering who the mother is. Well, between the two of us, this is the gay guys talking, I'm more emotional and I like shopping, so I think I'm the mother. And I have long hair and he's an alcoholic, so I guess it's like two moms. Yeah, but how did you get this baby? Well, we didn't pull it out of your vagina, if that's what you're saying. People think they can ask gay people anything. It's not okay. We didn't ask you guys whose butt you use for anal. I guess what's confusing us is you never mentioned that you were having a baby, so this feels pretty sudden. Well, that's because it wasn't planned. Sometimes it's an accident. Well, how does a gay couple have a baby by accident? Well, what do you want us to say, that we stole her? Did you? Well, we like to think that she stole us. So that means yes? Wow, transphobia is real. Is one of you a trans man? You just cannot ask that girl. No. They should come up with a word for what people have when people have a phobia towards homophobia. Do you mean homophobia? Oh, I've never heard that word. Where is your baby from? It's from us, but how did you get it? What on earth are you talking about? God, the way people talk to gay people is crazy. Right, pretty transgressive sketch there, questioning gay couples adopting. Another transgressive sketch here on Saturday Night Live. This was a medication ad parody. So you got rock climbing, hiking with your interracial friends, kayaking with your significant other. If you find yourself doing any of these activities in slow motion, you may have herpes. These recreational activities are the #1 indicators of herpes. Medical science doesn't understand why the herpes virus caused people to seek to have active fun in slow motion and go on interracial hiking, but we know it does. That means it's time to get tested for herpes. One night, I found myself happily salsa dancing in slow motion as a black woman talking about dancing with my white husband. That's when I knew I should contact my doctor. Sure enough, it was herpes. I was experiencing painful genital sores, but that could be anything. But if you find yourself rock climbing in slow motion, that means only one thing: herpes. Herpes is easily spread. Just look for signs like dancing in an outdoor beer garden with string lights, winning a carnival game on the first try, cheering in the front row of a folk rock concert in a very small space, or hanging out with exactly one white person, one black person, one Asian person, and one Latin person. If you're hanging out in a slow motion group, it may be hard to know which friend is the one with herpes. It's simple. It's the one who's having the most fun. Not all slow-mo activities are signs of herpes. If you're a woman wearing a generic men's football jersey and no pants, your husband has erectile dysfunction. If your child is showing you a drawing, you are clinically depressed. If you find yourself in a big musical number in the middle of an office, you have diabetes or diarrhea. So, pretty good medication ad there on Saturday Night Live.
Destruction of Japan, the inevitable rise of power of Soviet Union, the inevitable poverty of those places where the wars are fought, and the necessity for the United States to play a different hand. So it's just as individuals are forced by the invisible hand to do certain things and pursue things in certain ways, nations are forced to do this as well. And the invisible hand here is that if nations follow their interests, they can easily understand what is happening in other nations and their interests, and align with it or resist it or what have you, use the elements of power. One of the elements of power is finance. Another dimension is economics. They are not the same thing. The production of goods and the financing of goods are two different things. Then there's politics, then there's the military aspect. So the relationship between nations is complex, but so is the relationship between human beings. I mean, love, hate, and everything else holds its hands. So the invisible hand led us to this point where the continued policies we're following, both in military deployments, in assuming wars, and assuming our role in economics, was no longer in our interest. And so we changed it. Now, other countries will change.
I've had to verify myself like twice already in the past hour with Google that it's really me. Come on, Google. It's getting annoying. I'm trying to run a high-quality show here. All right, this is author Chris Whipple.
Around him, a better,
talking about
more
Trump,
competent
Susie
chief of staff
Wiles.
than he's ever had. But he still doesn't know the difference between campaigning and governing. You know, Ken Duberstein, Ronald Reagan's last chief, used to say, when you're campaigning, you try to destroy your opponent. When you're governing, you try to make friends with your opponent. That's not in Trump's DNA.
And Mario Cuomo used to say, you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, every chief of staff knows the difference, to be sure. But Trump has this feral genius as a campaigner. And
what is it? A feral genius?
Kind of feral genius. It's just instinctive genius. And he was a brilliant campaigner and had a very strong campaign manager at Susie Wiles, and I tell that whole story.
And the other Chris, what's his name?
Chris LaCivita,
right.
Co-chair, who famously or infamously created the the Swift Boat Veterans for Truth ad campaign against John Kerry back in 2004, which some people believe sank John Kerry's campaign. He was, of course, La Vida behind the anti-trans ad, the famous ad in the 2024 campaign. You can read about it in Uncharted. And Susie Wiles is a fascinating character, as obviously I think people are realizing now. She learned to deal with difficult men, in part
Yes.
because her father was Pat Summerall, the famous
Exactly, the great football player and then announcer.
and sportscaster who was also an alcoholic. And she organized interventions. And she'd be the first to tell you, I think, that children of alcoholics have a kind of sensitivity. They know what they can control and what they can't. And that served her well with Donald Trump, I think.
Uncharted is a great story.
That's a great point, right? Child of alcoholics, child of an alcoholic father, Susie Wiles, helps her get clarity about what can be controlled and what can't.
Theirs in their interest. But there is that lag period between the time when the norm, which is somehow sacred, although it changes every 50 or 100 years, with the norm must not be violated. Well, the norm itself is built on the reality of the international system. And when that reality shifts, as I think it did after the fall of the Soviet Union, and now vigorously after the failure of Ukraine, now we see that, well, Russia is not nearly as much danger as we thought. We can do.
Okay, it's been a while since we played any Decoding the Gurus. This is really rich. It's decoding Dr. K. All right, that guy just gives me the creeps. I'm not a fan of Dr. K.
Things, right? And there's an infinite number of interventions like this that sound good. You know, building resilience, you know.
Does it sound good, Donald? High price initiations to like gurus. That's what he's referencing. And he's saying he was unfairly dismissive of their value. But that's a very, niche, even within the whole alternative spiritual ecosystem. Like paying large amounts of money for an initiation is I think, a relatively niche product.
So Chris, is this exactly what I think it is, or what it sounds like? What is a high-priced initiation exactly?
Oh, well, let's hear a little bit more.
So over about 18, 19 years of practice, I started to realize that, a lot of this crap is valid. And I understood why it's valid, how it's valid. So I would say I took the plunge in some ways.
Oh, interesting.
And did a couple of things that I had avoided. And I also realized that I had avoided those things out of essentially a certain degree of ego. And
So YouTube just kept pushing Dr. K on me. Dr. K. Guy's got he's a psychiatrist trained at Harvard, just gives me the willies.
Because I don't really know what it's like. I don't know. I'm just judging. If I see a big price tag, I think that this person must be a scam artist. And so I did a couple of those things, and it's been quite revolutionary.
Wow. I mean, I'm so curious on what those things were.
Yeah,
I share your same skepticism on like the guru charging a lot of money, because I feel like you grew up in India and you would hear about these like gurus in villages who are just like basically taking advantage of poor people is how I used to see it, where they would charge people at like basically all their money to reach some sort of enlightenment. I feel like that's antithetical to what enlightenment should represent. It's like it shouldn't be a cause and effect or input thing. It should be like a quiet solo work. Like enlightenment can't be sold is what my preconceived notion is. But maybe something. Maybe there's some practices that are legit.
Yeah. So I think it's a very...
That's something I like about normative Judaism is that you don't have to pay for enlightenment. The perspective on Torah, that is the mainstream traditional Jewish perspective on Torah, is that it's there, it's out in the open. You don't have to, pay big bucks for an initiation into the mysteries of the Torah.
Very reasonable statement to make, but I this is going to get weird, but I think there are presumptions about the nature, like the metaphysics of enlightenment, that I think that we're missing a couple of things.
Yeah, Dr. K wants to make money charging people huge amounts of money for his initiation into the spiritual realm.
There's a lot of presumptions about enlightenment. One of them is that it doesn't involve paying a lot of money.
Yeah,
that's prejudice and ignorance. Unfortunately, a lot of people think that, but it's just purely out of ignorance and prejudice, I think.
Yeah, I love Dr. K's doublespeak where, that's a very reasonable statement. I had the same, preconceptions, but like if we can just break out of that paradigm and get through our, ignorant presumptions about things.
Yeah. Like he's a master at this, and he's got these little phrases, and of course one of the most common ones is, that's a great question. That's a great question.
Yeah.
You always know that's going to be a launchpad for something when that comes up. Or like he said there, what was it? He said, this is going to get a bit crazy. And that's going to be a setup for him doing a Jordan Peterson-esque massive loop of double talk, so that you're sort of baffled by what's going on and you're just going to kind of nod your head and go, oh, okay.
So he does go on a bit more, Matt, about, specifically what he's talking about here, right? The presumptions that we've built up and like why they might not be valid. So can you buy enlightenment? No, of course not. But can you level up your propensity for enlightenment through payments?
Well, that's a different thing entirely.
So one good example of this is Diksha, which means initiation. So people think that there is, like if I get initiated into a practice versus I just like read a book about the practice or watch a video about the practice, those are qualitatively quite different. That's my view now. So to receive Diksha from a guru, they basically impart, it's like they impart a portion of their spiritual energy into you, which is kind of like receiving a down payment for a house. So it's like when your parents give you a down payment for a house, like it drastically changes the trajectory of your financial situation, right? So instead of like starting in debt, and so the efficiency of the growth increases very rapidly when you receive Diksha. And so those kinds of concepts I didn't really understand very well until I started digging into it more and more and more. And then that begs the question, what does spiritual energy mean? So then that's a whole different conversation about understanding that the reason that meditation works for some people and doesn't work for other people is because of like this, basically the spiritual energy accumulation stat, which you can meditate and it can have some mental effects and some physiological effects. But there's a third dimension of like leveling up, which is really what matters for enlightenment. And I would agree that enlightenment can't be bought or sold, but there are absolutely certain techniques and certain things that can increase your propensity for enlightenment. I believe that.
This guy is just such a scam artist. Ugh.
You're
I think there's a pop culture version and an indulgent version of talk therapy, which is incredibly popular.
Like in Larry David world, everybody is doing therapy, right? They all have their therapist and they're all doing the internal work. And this is also a thing that you see when you're like watching The White Lotus or whatever, right? That the rich characters will all have their therapist back in their city or whatever. So yes, there is
they all
that.
use that language. That's right. And it is, it's a cultural thing. That's all I'm saying. It's sort of accepted in certain milieus as totally normal, totally, valid, all that stuff. I'm just pointing out it's a very specific cultural practice. Anyway, go on.
Okay, well, they go on and they have more discussion about Sweets' meditation experiences and what he may or may not have got out of it. And there was some discussion about this thing, which comes up a lot, Matt, in the content we cover about, like, being authentic versus reacting to what others or social pressure. Like the heterodox gurus talk about it as well. It's a recurrent theme in pretty much all of the content that we look at, including like the optimizers and whatnot, right? But here's Dr. K's kind of approach to that, because I think it's hitting on similar themes.
When you are with other people, your impression of who you are is fractured between your experience and their perception of your experience. So if I go to school with a Ninja Turtles backpack and I'm excited because I like Ninja Turtles, I wanted this Ninja Turtles backpack. I'm happy. I'm like, I got my Ninja Turtles backpack. And the second kids start making fun of me. This is very confusing. Now there's a part of me that loves it, and there's a part of me that like doesn't love it, and I'm getting really confused. And so then over time, what starts to happen is we start to compromise who we are. We try to reconcile this internal thing with this external impression. And we slowly, and this we understand, right? This is why you were getting tons of Slack messages, because you compromised what you wanted for the sake of the world around you. And as you compromise in that way, generally speaking, it leads to unhappiness, because I'm the most happy when I'm with my Ninja Turtles backpack. So if we think about the purpose of meditation, or not the purpose, a purpose for you is to more solidly connect with that internal sense of who you are. But this is important, not in a way that's temporary, but in a way that you carry with you throughout the day. So as you carry it with you, as people start to judge you, you acknowledge that judgment. You can even acknowledge like the necessity of, I don't know if this kind of makes sense, but you can acknowledge the necessity of playing the game, but your internal investment is not there, right? So I can look at the situation and say, I need to shave today because I'm going to stream. I don't care about streaming, but I recognize that if I don't shave, there will be some consequences. I don't have to be emotionally invested.
Detachment, Matt. Detachment.
Detachment. But it's detachment. I get the Buddhist, Zen, whatever mystical influences there, but it's also just a perfect reflection of American culture and modern Western culture in general.
Dr. K would not like this. He would not like you say that's what it is. But
it absolutely is, because as anyone who's got this sort of background in social psychology, anthropology, or whatever, humans are social animals, right?
Yes.
But in the popular culture, and you mentioned this at the beginning of the show, there is this concept that there is this pure you that is there on the inside. It's authentic. Yeah, this Rousseauian child of nature, that wants to grow and flourish. And there's a society out there. There's other people, right? They're going to be judging you, controlling your behavior, expecting you to shave, you name it. So this perfect you is rubbing up against this outer society, which is harsh, mean, and uncaring. And what you've got to do through, and it can be traumatic and a lot of that stuff. So what you've got to do through the self-work is to more accurately find that real you and express it, your individual self, more and more fully. And I'm not judging this point of view. I'm just pointing out that it's not psychology. It's rather an expression of a certain set of cultural values, right? And that's what is so appealing about it. That's what I'm saying. It's not saying it's good or bad. Like it's not, I think, fundamentally better or worse to be like in the Japanese sort of society where it's like,
where social pressures are super high.
You need to accommodate yourself better. If you're not fitting in, then you need to change, sort of thing. Like that's not necessarily better or worse, but both of them are just social constructs. They're like cultural values that he's expressing using psychobabble.
Well, I will say though, Matt, in Dr. K's defense, you didn't expect that.
No.
That there are a bunch of spiritual traditions, including from Vedic traditions, where he's mostly drawing from, where there are concepts that there is a more pure, crystalline, permanent essence or underline that you can uncover through spiritual work, right? So there are other systems beyond the individualistic New Age version, which does tell a similar story of uncovering the debris spread there by society and conditioning to help you uncover, your spiritually pure essence. So it's not only modern Western like self-work that has that concept.
Agreed. No, I don't disagree with that at all. And like the Zen Buddhist take on it, right, which is a bit of a different angle, right? You kind of deconstruct the self and find out there's nothing.
So the Australian speaking is the psychologist Matthew Brown, and the Irish dude is Chris Kavanagh.
There, but it's still a similar kind of thing, right? Where you're kind of ignoring the outside world to a large degree and focusing on cultivating an inner purity, or even if you call that purity and nothingness, it's still the same kind of vibe, right?
But there's still this notion in Buddhism and Zen Buddhism and most of those traditions where that's a stage where you then pass through and you are then able to be in the world and you don't need to be meditating or isolated or whatever, and you're kind of self-realized, self-actualized. So he's saying now you might still shave for the meeting because you like the Matrix, you see all the paths of consequence and social appropriation that will come. So you're doing the same thing that everyone else is doing.
It just doesn't matter.
But you're doing it.
I get it. I get it. You're putting on underpants in the morning.
You're more superior.
Out of consideration for the rest of society.
But you're doing it in a better way.
You know that underpants don't matter, but you're putting them on because but I'm not actually having a go with Dr. K, right? Because it's an incredibly common zeitgeist, right? And I'm just saying it's not psychology. For most people, it's an expression of the sort of cultural values.
Some positive psychologists might sign on to it. But in any case.
Okay, they did a big decoding on Naomi Klein. So where do we go here?
That's one that we might talk about. So yeah, it is what it is. So there we go, Matt. We've covered a bunch of different things. We got a little bit Ryan Grimm in there, but what's the big idea, the big picture for you with Naomi Klein? What's your takeaway? Is she?
Is it 180? Didn't quite line it up. Here we go.
Like obvious partisan valence, take one on. Like I understand why most progressives say minimum wage and
countries and whatnot, but we agree with the goal. That's true. Now, Ryan Grimm, however, that's not what he wanted to talk about, Matt. Like he wasn't. It wasn't about vaccine patents and developing countries and whatnot. So he tries again.
Last question for me, and then if you want to read a little bit more. So one of the main things I took away from your book is how much fear of the mirror world shapes our own approach to truth and to our own politics. Justified, I think, fear, which then ends up linking the things that we believe with our tribe, with our partisan politics, and you become unable. Then you end up with a situation where things that don't have any like obvious partisan valence take one on. Like I understand why most progressives say minimum wage should be higher, and conservatives say there should be no minimum wage. Like that makes ideological sense. Doesn't make ideological sense to talk about COVID origins. Like that doesn't fit into a partisan lens. Or what you wrote about with potential complications that the virus produces during pregnancy or during a menstrual cycle. Like that shouldn't have anything to do with partisan politics, yet it did. And so on the vaccine, for instance, as it became increasingly clear that it wasn't stopping the spread, it was impossible for Democrats to talk about that. And I feel like the fear that you write about in your book, it helps to explain that. So how can people break out of that?
No, Ryan Grimm sucks. He sucks.
Did
you pick up on what he wanted to get at, Matt? There was
Yeah. After it's proved that the vaccines didn't stop the spread. And he's so uncomfortable with the fact that he's bought into some pretty dumb misinformation and conspiracy theories. And he's very uncomfortable because he's a left-wing ideologue. He doesn't like it. He's not allowed to be into this stuff because those are the right-wing ones. Like, why does the right-wing get to have those? Why can't we have those ones as well?
Yeah, I know. And it's that thing, Matt, that thing. It's never going to stop being a thing that annoys me when people are like, you weren't allowed to talk about the transmission not being completely stopped by. Yes, you were. People talked about it on the podcast dedicated to viruses. I heard them discussing it before, after, during the I heard it talked about on interviews. I heard the same clips that everyone else did about Rachel Maddow or somebody, saying an overstatement, right? But in most cases, especially with Fauci, when you went on to listen to what he actually said, he was always pretty clear about trade-offs or uncertainties or these kind of things. But like Ryan Grimm and his cadre, they presented that nobody ever discussed the possibility of it being a lab leak. Like that was not allowed in the scientific literature. Yes, it was. People were discussing that. People were publishing papers about it. Articles were being written about it. And you still can talk about it now. And back then, there were certain progressive journalists or whatever, discourse surfers, who, yes, only take these issues through a political lens. But that is not the entire discourse around it. It's not even the entire of the left wing, let alone the scientific community. And they just always act like now everyone is looking back and we've all been vindicated. It's basically Brett Weinstein. It's what he's presenting here as being vindicated. And no, sorry, Ryan, you were not vindicated. You're not. You should subscribe to Debunk the Funk and watch some of the videos about, transmission effects and whatnot of vaccination. But anyway, sorry, it frustrates me, Matt, that's because you just endlessly hear it.
But for this show, we should have covered Ryan Grimm rather than.
I'm not a huge fan.
You're much more passionate about him. All right. Well, that's good. You got that off your chest.
I got that off my chest a little bit. But Naomi Klein, I think she did a good job of deflecting away for that for most of the interview, Matt. But she finally gives in and kind of gives him what he wants. So this is, or at least to me, this is like an effort to placate Ryan Grimm in the hope that the questions might end.
Yes. So I think that is incredibly important work. I think as a journalist, there just needs to be a little bit of just doing our jobs, right? Like I think people can handle more complexity than we sometimes give them credit for. So you can say that there are some adverse reactions to vaccines and people can still make, an educated decision about it. And if you don't, then they're going to go do their own research and they're going to end up in the arms of some people who are really, really untrustworthy. I think, what you were referencing around vaccines and pregnancy, it's incredibly important for pregnant women to be vaccinated because your immune system is suppressed when you are pregnant, because your body needs not to reject the fetus. And so if you get COVID when you're pregnant, there's a really good chance you'll get quite sick. This was not really explained. It was just sort of treated like, oh, what a ridiculous idea, people, and so I just think, just doing some basic education, and also explaining, and also just treating people a little more kindly, like, that's a really legitimate question. Like, I was afraid of everything when I was pregnant. I was afraid of eating soft cheese when I was pregnant. So I can understand why people were afraid of these vaccines. And I think it was honestly a failure of scientific communication that sort of simple fact was not explained properly. But I just saw a lot of mocking of people who had those concerns, and I think a lot of people were pushed into, they were suddenly getting their advice from Instagram, momfluencers, and that was super bad,
That's her best effort of throwing him a bone. But she does highlight, even in that response, that actually people that were pregnant, they did, benefit from getting vaccinated. So
yeah, she's quite deft there. She sort of starts off with agreeing with him in the tone of agreeing with him, but sort of judo flips it around. Kind of not really agreeing with him. But look, in any case, whatever you think of that, we're going to give her a pass because clearly that is the interviewer's driving.
Particular pet topic. Yes, it is. And I think she navigated it as well as can be. But he wanted her to focus on the scientists, the miscommunication. They were arrogant. They talked down to people. They ignored legitimate critiques. And she kind of, gave him a bit.
She threw him a bone.
Yeah. But that's...
Enough.
I possibly would have as well. Just kept
just stop asking. Just can we stop? We move on. Yeah.
Things we got a little bit Ryan Grimm in there, but what's the big idea, the big picture for you with Naomi Klein? What's your takeaway? Is she a secular guru? What do you think?
Yeah, that's right. We haven't really talked about really much of how she does or doesn't fit the gurometer throughout this episode. I mean, there are a couple of small things, like there's that little bit of that sort of self-congratulatory, self-aggrandizing kind of narrative stuff, but like we talked about, that
not
kind of TEDxy. No, it's pretty much on par with your typical TEDxy sort of thing. Look, I don't think she's a guru. I don't think she hits the vast majority of things on our gurometer very highly. But on the other hand, I guess I don't super love what I've heard, and I think it's because the thing with Malcolm Gladwell, right, is what he does is he pieces together a superficially compelling narrative by a bunch of cherry picking and framing and stuff like that. So if you read it casually, you'll come away with this like you've just been dazzled by this amazing big idea, right, which links together all of these different phenomena, and now you can kind of see it. And Malcolm Gladwell's hook is kind of like a surprising, out of the box way of looking at things. That's counterintuitive. That's it. That's the hook for him. For Naomi Klein, the hook is anti-capitalism. And corporations are bad, community building and, lifting up less advantaged people, basically all of the hyper-progressive stuff right now. So if you are a hyper-progressive person or just a somewhat progressive person, then it will ding all of those things and it will feel that you'll get that aha moment all the time. It will be very satisfying in the same way that a Malcolm Gladwell book can be. But as far as I can tell, and I, big caveat here is I haven't read her books, I've only read a lot of secondhand stuff about them and listened to Naomi herself, but I get the feeling that it's kind of like Malcolm Gladwell for progressives. What do you think? Too harsh?
Well, I think, from what I've seen, often I agree with various points that she's making on the analysis around the topics that I know, right, which is like conspiracy theories and charismatic gurus and this kind of thing. She is pointing to real issues. She's highlighting incentives at play and psychological motivations that are real. But I feel that there's a framework that she is fitting those facts into, which is, as you said, like kind of anti-capitalist political activist agenda. And around that, the conspiracy theory narratives and all those kind of things get marshaled into that broader framework. Because she presented, I heard in another interview, maybe it was in a book, that she was talking about how she resisted becoming a brand by self-consciously trying to avoid like becoming pigeonholed by talking about different issues. Right? She was talking about corporations and brands and marketing. Then she was talking about global warming. Then she was talking about response to disasters and so on and so forth. And she presented that as like an eclectic series of interests, which I agree with in one direction, but I'm also like, but it's not very unpredictable to me. It's a particular genre, right? And its ultimate conclusion is always the kind of neoliberal capitalism and globalization is bad, right? And it's very familiar to me in part because that was the same conclusion that everybody that I went to university with in SOAS had, right? And it's a very, prominent and popular conclusion amongst the left, particularly amongst the progressive set of the left. So I think that you have to acknowledge, and maybe I think she probably does to a certain extent, that her output is a little bit more towards the activist side, right? In terms of promoting a particular vision and wanting to advocate for a particular kind of politics. And that means that the analysis is in service of that. And as a result, things get skewed a bit. So like, I think a lot of it comes down to the Modern Bailey aspect of, are you taking the strong version or are you taking the weak version? And the weak version is often perfectly reasonable, but the strong version, much less so. And I do think, to use my own buzzword, there's an ethnocentric kind of focus on it, that when you're talking about capitalism, what you actually mean is North American consumerism, and a particular kind of consumerism as well. You're not talking about capitalism in Norway or capitalism in Japan or these different cultural contexts, because the patterns look different. And I just think that, there are things that you can explain through the economic system and the political system, but that's not all there is. Perhaps understandably, as an anthropologist, I think the culture is very significant, and it is not purely determined by the mode of production in a society. So in terms of the worst parts where I think there is guru-esque aspects coming through, I think it is in those aspects where the agenda and the kind of desire to have like big ideas, which are how you sell books, is oversaturating, the analysis. The last thing I'll say is there's points where you're agreeing with everything. The points she's making are valid, even, where they are like focusing on a particular criticism of capitalism or whatnot. But then the conclusion often like veers off into what feel like much less substantial points that rely a bit more on buzzwords and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, this is the thing. I agree with a lot of the tenets of that progressive point of view. So like free markets, fundamentalism, deregulation, privatization of everything, austerity policies, globalization, right? These can have...
You're for them all.
I am somewhat for them.
You're supposed to say... You're supposed to reject them.
I mean, that's the thing. They can have bad and good things, right? On one hand, Klein would say, look, corporations have been able to exploit lax labor laws in developing countries and therefore maximize their profits and concentrate wealth, right? Now, that is true. But it is also very, very true that literally billions of people have come out of poverty as a result of those very same forces, right? Countries like Singapore, places like Hong Kong and large areas of China, they were incredibly poor before participating in that sort of global economy. So for me personally, I would just find a more interesting analysis would be one that doesn't just look at like one side of the coin or the other, like isn't just like a simple cheerleader for, yay, globalization and free market, great, or just focusing on the negative things. You actually, a more interesting analysis would be to integrate it all, a balanced one. But I think a book or an analysis like that would be less appealing to many people, because I think most of us would prefer to have the kind of, Malcolm Gladwell-esque neat narratives that are provided, whether they're right-wing or left-wing.
Yeah. So, that's our take on it, for what it's worth. But
better or worse.
Yeah. And I do think there's substance to the stuff that she's talking about, and there are real issues that are highlighted in that kind of thing. But it's just...
Okay, so there was Decoding the Gurus taking down a left-wing intellectual, Naomi Klein. This is from Commentary, April 10.
Donald Trump in the room. And that is his narcissism, which we've discussed many times. But when it comes to making policy that has global implications, it was good to see him blink. It shows he actually isn't completely off.
Right. I think that's the key point. And I don't want us to devolve into an hour of Trump bashing, but so I'll just give him credit that he does change his mind. So in some ways, he is like FDR in a few ways, but in this way, in the sense that FDR always said, if something's not working, we should just abandon it. And clearly, he went to the brink of a global financial crisis. That's what forced him to cause this reprieve. But he did stop. The other element here is, as Christine mentioned earlier, is what happens in the 90 days. And I'm also fascinated by the fashion metaphors that have sprouted over the past 24 hours, because we've now kind of turned the White House is now like Donald Trump's big and tall store. And all the countries of the world, the 50 countries or 70 countries, they're lining up outside, and the president is promising them tailored deals, right? Not off the rack. That's what he's been using all these fashion, not off the rack. These are going to be tailored deals for every country. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said yesterday, these are bespoke. They're bespoke deals. So each country is going to come into the tailor shop and they're going to get the unique treatment, the deal that suits them the best. And think that people aren't paying enough attention to that metaphor, because in my view, this will not end up being about trade alone. I think these countries are going to come into these negotiations. They're going to find that the Trump team also wants to talk about defense expenditure, also wants to talk about mineral rights, also wants to talk about what have they done, what have this country done for the United States lately. And so the process of negotiation is going to be much more complicated, I think, than simply saying, well, if you lower your tariffs and you eliminate non-tariff trade barriers, then we'll keep the present tariff rates on your exports to the United States. I think it's going to be much larger, and it involves Trump's main goal, which is essentially changing the entire structure of the post-war system in ways that directly benefit the United States, where the United States is no longer being a superpower who is benevolent in many ways, like looking out not only for its national interest, but also the interest of its allies, opening its markets in order to encourage the prosperity of its allies, basing troops in forward deployments to protect the security of their allies, not really expecting anything in return. That was the case for about 80 years. And Trump's second term is about ending that system and turning it into something where America is paid for what it does. Okay, if that...
All right, that will do it. I'll see you later, mate. Take care.